Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring the life of a truly remarkable woman from early Islam, Sulaym.
Yeah, she's a fascinating figure, and I know a lot of people are already familiar with her story, but I think I think there's so much that we can learn from her life and legacy.
Absolutely. And, I have to admit, when I first started researching her, I was just struck by, how often she's compared to Khadijah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, she's often seen as kind of a parallel figure to Khadijah, especially in terms of her unwavering support for the Prophet, PBUH, and for the early Muslim community.
So let's start at the beginning. Sulaym, before Islam, I mean, she wasn't just like an ordinary woman in Medina, was she?
Oh, not at all. No, she was actually known for her intelligence, her strong character.
And beauty, they say.
And beauty, yes. She was actually, even literate, which was pretty rare for women at that time.
Wow. So she's already kind of like a leading figure even before Islam enters the picture.
Exactly, exactly. She was married to Malik ibn Nadar, who was a wealthy merchant, and they had a young son, Anas. So, she was already a prominent figure in her community.
And then Islam comes to Medina. How does she encounter Islam?
So, um, Salam actually embraces Islam very early on.
Really?
Yes, in one of the very first Dawa gatherings in Medina. In fact, some scholars even say that she might have been the first woman in Medina to convert to Islam.
Wow, that's amazing. So her husband is away on these trading journeys. He comes back and she's Muslim.
Yeah, and you can imagine, he was not too happy about it.
I can imagine.
He reacted pretty harshly, with insults, even threats,
Wow.
trying to get her to abandon her new faith.
Oh.
But Salam, she stood firm. And what's really interesting is that even in her responses to her husband, she's using proper Islamic terminology.
Oh, really?
Yes, like she would respond to his anger with composure,
Yeah.
and she would, politely correct him if he was using, pre-Islamic terminology.
It's like she's already embodying like these Islamic principles in like this really difficult situation.
Exactly. It's amazing. She had this, really incredible strength of character and conviction, even at that early stage.
So this tension continues. Eventually, Malik ibn Nadar, he passes away.
Yes, he dies a non-Muslim while he's away on another one of his trading journeys, and Salam is left as a widow.
So she's a widow, she has a young son, and this is where Abu Talha enters the picture.
So yeah,
He's like this prominent, wealthy guy in Medina.
yes, Abu Talha was a very well-respected, wealthy figure in Medina.
So he's obviously, taken with Sulaym.
He was clearly impressed
Yeah.
by her qualities, and he proposed marriage to her.
And I know this isn't just like an ordinary yes or no kind of proposal.
No, not at all. Salam, she laid down a condition. She said that marriage to a non-Muslim was just not an option for her.
So she's basically saying, convert to Islam and then we can talk.
Yeah, in a nutshell, yes.
I mean, that's incredibly bold. I mean, was she concerned about the social implications of that?
I mean, you have to remember, this was a society where, status, wealth, all of these things were really important in marriage.
So she's kind of like turning that whole system on its head.
Exactly. And it's a powerful statement about, her commitment to her faith. Her faith was not something that she was willing to compromise, even for a seemingly advantageous marriage.
So what's Abu Talha's reaction to this? Is he like offended?
He was initially taken aback.
Yeah,
He offered her, more wealth and
but
status.
she's not budging.
But Salam, she was adamant. She insisted that the only dowry she would accept was his acceptance of Islam.
Wow. And this is what ultimately leads him to Islam.
It's a beautiful story. She didn't just, preach at him or try to force her beliefs on him. Instead, she used these, subtle, almost everyday interactions to kind of nudge him towards Islam.
Okay, so can you give me an example of that?
So, for example, she would subtly point out, the flaws in idol worship, prompting him to question his own beliefs.
So she's not engaging in like these big theological debates. She's just like dropping these little seeds of doubt, I guess.
Exactly. And it's so effective, right? Because it makes him think for himself.
It plants the seed.
Exactly.
So eventually Abu Talha, he does embrace Islam.
Yes. And their marriage is celebrated, with Islam as the dowry.
I mean, that's incredible. It's like a testament to, the power of one woman's conviction.
Absolutely. And it's a story that really became legendary in Islamic history. This idea of Islam as the most valuable dowry.
So they're married now. They're both Muslim. a new chapter is beginning.
A new chapter indeed. And it's filled with all sorts of, amazing events and challenges and triumphs.
And that's what we're going to explore in the rest of our deep dive. Sulaim's family and the Prophet, PBUH, they had like a really special bond.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the prophet, PBUH, would frequently visit their household. He felt very comfortable there, very at
But
ease.
before we get to all that, I have to ask about this pledge of allegiance, the second pledge at Aqaba.
Right, right.
Um, Sulaim, I mean, she was so devoted to the Prophet, PBUH. I imagine she would have wanted to be a part of that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
this was such a pivotal moment for the early Muslims, right?
Yeah.
This this pledge of allegiance between the prophet, PBUH, and the people of Medina.
But at that time, women, they weren't really participating in these formal pledges in the same way as men were.
Right.
So how did she express her commitment?
Well, she brought her young son, Anas, to the prophet, PBUH.
Anas, the same Anas who later became like this famous narrator of hadith.
That's right. And she offered him to the prophet, PBUH, to be in his service.
Wow. So she's basically like entrusting her child to the Prophet, PBUH.
Exactly. It's this incredible act of faith and trust, right?
So what did the Prophet, PBUH, say?
He accepted Anas, and he made a beautiful dua for him. He prayed that, Allah would grant him wealth, a large family, and a special place in his service. And Anas himself later attributed, his long life, his prosperity, all that to that very moment, to that dua.
It's amazing to think about just like the ripple effects of that one act of faith.
It really is.
And I remember reading that Sulaim, she actually had like a dedicated space in her home for prayer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She had transformed part of her home into a prayer space. And when the prophet PBUH arrived in Medina, he honored her by praying in that very space.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's a beautiful example of how faith was, already so interwoven into everyday life, even back then.
It's like almost setting the precedent, for Muslims having prayer spaces in their homes.
Exactly. And it shows just how close, the prophet PBUH felt to her and to her family. And there's so many stories about, his interactions with them, his visits to their home. Like, he would even explain this special bond as a form of mercy because Sulaim's brothers, they were martyred alongside him.
Oh, wow. So there's this like really deep connection.
Yeah.
I remember hearing the story about Abu Talha noticing that the Prophet, PBUH, was like hungry and tired one day.
Oh, yeah, this is a great story. So, um, Sulaim, without hesitation, she gathered whatever food they had and sent her son Anas to deliver it to the prophet, PBUH.
Knowing the Prophet, PBUH, I'm sure he didn't just like keep it for himself.
No, no. He was known for his generosity, right? He decided to bring all his companions with him to Sulaim's house.
Oh, wow.
And so, she presents this simple meal, some bread and butter, and then something miraculous happens. The prophet, PBUH, he prays over the food and it multiplies. It's enough to feed like 80 men.
Wow. That is amazing. The baraka in that household, it must have been just overflowing.
It really was. And they say that the leftovers from that meal continued to feed her family for 2 months.
That's incredible. It's like a reminder, that true generosity, it's not just about like material abundance, but it's about these blessings that come with it.
Exactly. And speaking of generosity, there's that other story about Abu Talha and his garden.
Oh yeah, the Garden of Biruha.
Right. So this was when the verse on charity was revealed, emphasizing the importance of giving from what you love most.
Yeah.
And immediately, Abu Talha, he goes to the prophet, PBUH, and he offers him his garden, which was his most beloved possession.
It's amazing, right? To just part with something so precious so willingly.
It really shows the profound impact that the Quran had on the hearts of the believers.
Yeah.
And, this selfless spirit of the Ansar, people of Medina who embraced Islam and supported the Prophet, PBUH, with incredible generosity.
So, Salam, we see this compassion, this generosity, but she was also like incredibly strong, incredibly courageous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
she actively participated in the community, even in battles. Like, she would carry water for the soldiers, tend to the wounded. And there's this funny story that Abu Talha tells about the Battle of the Trench.
Oh, I want to hear this.
So he sees Sulam, she's concealing a knife under her abaya.
Mm.
And he's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, if anyone tries to attack the prophet, PBUH, from behind, I'm going to take care of it."
Wow, she's like a warrior.
Exactly. She was fiercely protective, of the prophet,
Yeah.
PBUH. But But her strength wasn't just, physical bravery. It was also about her resilience in the face of tragedy. When they lost their young son, Ahmed.
Oh, yeah, that must have been incredibly difficult for them.
Oh, it was heartbreaking. But even in her sorrow, Salam's her first thought was for her husband. She chose to like delay breaking the news to him until the next morning.
Wow. That's incredible strength.
Right. And when she finally did tell him, she used this beautiful analogy to help him understand. She compared their son to a trust that had been returned to God.
It's such a profound way of looking at death.
It really is. And, Abu Talha, he's obviously overwhelmed with grief. He goes to the prophet, PBUH, for solace. And the prophet, PBUH, he reveals something really remarkable. He tells Abu Talha that Sulaym, she had conceived another child on the same night that Ahmed passed away.
It's amazing how even in moments of such deep sorrow, there can be like this glimmer of hope.
Right. And it's not presented as something that should be expected, in every instance of loss. But it's specific to their story, highlighting their extraordinary faith. So they named this new son Abdullah.
And what happened to Abdullah?
Well, he went on to have 7 sons, and all 7 of them became Hafaz, meaning they memorized the entire Quran.
Wow. That's a legacy.
It really is. It just shows how even through hardship and loss, Allah's blessings can manifest in such incredible ways.
Their story is just so inspiring.
It really is. And there's actually more to Sulaym's story that I think really highlights this special connection with the Prophet, PBUH. Salam's house was like a place of peace for the Prophet, PBUH.
Yeah, they say he would even take naps at her house sometimes.
It's a really strong show of the level of comfort he felt with them.
Wow.
Can you imagine having the Prophet, PBUH, feel that at ease in your house?
That's such a high level of trust. Speaking of that, I have to ask about that story with the prophet's PDUH perspiration.
Oh yeah, the perfume story.
She collected some during one of his naps and mixed it with perfume.
I know some people think it's a bit odd, but
But I think it shows the level of reverence, right?
exactly. I mean, she saw blessings in everything related to the Prophet, PBUH.
It makes you think about those other stories, like the one where Sulaym asked to keep some of the prophet's PBUH hair after he got a haircut during Umrah, and he agreed.
It's incredible. You really get a sense of, how beloved he was. And it wasn't just Sulaym. Her whole family had this reverence for him. There are stories about him playing with their son, Ahmed, asking him all sorts of questions about his pet bird. And then when that bird died, he comforted Ahmed with such kindness.
It really shows, just how much he cared for everyone, regardless of their age. It's really beautiful.
It is. So I have to ask, what is it about Sulaym's story that really resonates with you?
It's hard to pick just one thing, but I think it's that she had both strength and softness. Like, she was so courageous, and she stood up for what she believed in, but she was also incredibly compassionate and generous, a real trailblazer. She kind of paved the way for Muslim women, to come.
I completely agree. She's a real inspiration for all of us. And, we can't forget the impact she had on her son, Anas.
Right. I mean, he became one of the most important narrators of hadith.
Exactly. Think about that. Her dedication to raising Anas in the service of the Prophet, PBUH, it ended up shaping, Islamic scholarship for centuries to come.
It really makes you think, about how our actions, they can have these ripple effects that we may never even fully realize. So, as we finish up, I'm left wondering, how can we all try to embody Sulaym's faith and her dedication in our lives?
That's the question, isn't it? I think for me, it's about, striving for that balance between strength and compassion. It's about having that courage to stand up for what we believe in. But at the same time, remembering to be kind and generous and realizing that we all have the potential to make a difference, just like Sulaym did.
That's a beautiful thought to end on. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive. The lives of these early Muslims, they're full of these incredible lessons that we can all benefit from. So I encourage you to explore their stories, learn from them, and be inspired. Until next time.